We have to go now!
My
They're coming for
God.
us! Mount up! Hurry! This way!
The rope was already tied. The horse was already nervous. Sarah McKenzie stood in the middle of Main Street in the town of Redemption, her hands tied behind her back. The sun was high and hot. It burned down on everyone like an angry fist. Dust blew across the street in small clouds. The wind moved through the empty bottles and old papers that nobody had cleaned up. The time was noon, the time for death. She was innocent. But nobody cared about that anymore. The crowd stood around her in a circle, maybe 200 people. Farmers, shop owners, cowboys, women, holding their children's hands. The blacksmith was there. The preacher was there. Even old Tom, who sat outside the saloon every day doing nothing, had come to watch. They all stood quietly, too quietly. It was the kind of quiet that meant something bad was about to happen. The kind of quiet that came right before screams. Sarah's horse, a thin brown mare named Dusty, stood beneath the rope that hung from the tall wooden post. The post was thick and dark and old. It had been used many times before. Dusty moved her feet back and forth. She did not understand what was happening. Horses never understand hangings. Horses only know when something is wrong. Sarah's face was pale, pale like paper, pale like death. Her blonde hair, usually tied neatly, had come loose. Now it hung around her face in messy pieces. Her blue eyes looked at the crowd, but she did not look angry. She looked sad. She looked like someone who had already died inside and was just waiting for the body to catch up. "This is not right," she said quietly. Her voice shook. "You all know this is not right." Nobody answered. Nobody looked at her. That was the worst part. They would not even look at her face. The man in charge was Sheriff Blackwood. He was very big and very mean. His face was red from years of drinking whiskey in the sun. His hands were large like animal paws. He stood on the wooden platform next to the rope, holding papers in his hand. He read from the papers in a loud voice that echoed down Main Street. "Sarah McKenzie, you are found guilty of stealing from the Miller family. You are found guilty of taking their gold. You are found guilty of the crime of theft. The punishment is death by hanging. May God have mercy on your soul." A woman in the crowd cried out. It was Margaret, Sarah's closest friend. Margaret's face was red. Tears ran down her cheeks like rivers. She tried to push forward toward Sarah, but two men grabbed her and held her back. "It is not true," Margaret screamed. "She never took anything. She never stole. The Miller boy put that gold in her room. He wanted to hurt her because she would not marry him. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows the truth." Sheriff Blackwood looked at Margaret with eyes that had no kindness in them. "If you do not be quiet, you will hang beside her," he said. Margaret went silent. Fear was stronger than love. Fear was always stronger. Sarah's eyes moved toward Margaret. For just a moment, her sad expression changed. It became gentle. She was trying to tell her friend that it was okay, that she understood, that this was not Margaret's fault. But Margaret had turned her face away, unable to watch. That hurt Sarah more than the rope around her neck. The other people in the crowd stood still and silent. Some of them knew the truth. The baker's wife knew. The schoolteacher knew. The owner of the general store knew. They all knew that Sarah was innocent. They all knew that the Miller family had lied. They all knew that the Miller boy had done this terrible thing because Sarah had refused to love him. But speaking up was dangerous. The Miller family was rich and powerful. Their father, Garrett Miller, was the richest man in the territory. He owned land. He owned buildings. He owned people. Speaking against the Millers meant losing your job. It meant your family going hungry. It meant being thrown out of town with nothing. So everyone stayed quiet. Silence became a choice, and that choice became a murder. Sheriff Blackwood placed the rope around Sarah's neck. His big rough hands moved slowly, like he was enjoying this moment. Sarah did not fight. She did not cry out. She simply stood there, accepting what was coming. Dusty moved nervously beneath her. The horse felt the weight of death in the air. "Do you have any last words?" the sheriff asked. Sarah looked at the crowd one more time. She looked at all their faces. She saw the shame in their eyes. She saw the fear. She saw the knowledge of their own weakness. And she spoke. "I forgive you," she said. "All of you. I forgive you for what you are doing, not because it is right, but because you are all afraid. And I know what fear does to people. It makes them small. It makes them cruel. It makes them forget who they are." Her voice was not angry. It was kind. That made it worse. That made it harder. Some people in the crowd began to cry. Old Tom put his face in his hands. The blacksmith looked at the ground. Garrett Miller stood at the front of the crowd watching. His face showed no feeling, no shame, no guilt. He had won. He had destroyed the girl who had said no to him, and he had done it legally. He had done it with the law's help. Any final prayers? The preacher asked. "I pray that God forgives all of you," Sarah said. "I pray that you find the courage to tell the truth. I pray that this town remembers what it did today." The sheriff looked at the crowd. He raised his hand high. In just a moment, he would drop his hand. The Dusty would be whipped forward. The rope would go tight. Sarah McKenzie would die for a crime she did not commit. Justice would be murdered in front of 200 people, and nobody would stop it. But then something happened that changed everything. A gunshot cracked through the air. The rope above Sarah's head exploded into pieces. Sarah fell to the ground, gasping and confused. Another gunshot. Then another. Bullets tore through the wooden post. Splinters of wood flew everywhere. People screamed. They ran in all directions, trying to hide. And riding down Main Street at full speed came a man nobody had seen in 5 years. It was Jacob Reed, and he had come home.
Jacob Reed was a ghost. Nobody expected ghosts to come back from the dead. He rode a black stallion that was covered in dust from hard riding. The horse's eyes were wild and angry, matching the eyes of the man on its back. Jacob's face was burned dark from the sun. His clothes were torn and dirty. He had a rifle in his right hand and a pistol on his hip, but it was his eyes that made people remember who he was. Those eyes had not changed in 5 years. They were still the same gray-blue color. They still looked at you like they could see everything you were hiding inside your heart. When Jacob had left Redemption 5 years ago, he was just a young man. He worked as a stable hand and a ranch helper. He had no money. He had no power. He had nothing except Sarah McKenzie's love. They were going to be married. Everyone in the town knew it. Sarah was the most beautiful girl in Redemption. She had golden hair and kind eyes and a gentle voice. Jacob was not rich, but Sarah did not care about money. She loved him because he was honest. She loved him because he was kind to animals. She loved him because he made her laugh even when times were hard. But then Garrett Miller came to town with his son, also named Garrett. The younger Garrett Miller was ugly on the inside and out. He was fat and lazy. He drank too much whiskey. He treated people like they were nothing. When he saw Sarah at the general store one morning, he decided he had to have her. Not because he loved her, because she was beautiful and he wanted to own something beautiful, the way he wanted to own nice clothes or expensive horses. He started following her everywhere. He would show up at her house with expensive gifts. He would tell her father that he wanted to marry her. Sarah said no. She said no every time. But Garrett Miller was not used to hearing the word no. One night, 5 years ago, Jacob had been walking Sarah home from church. They were holding hands. They were talking about where they would build their house someday. They were so happy they did not notice the men on horses following them. Garrett Miller and 3 of his father's ranch workers came out of the darkness and attacked Jacob. They beat him with sticks and rocks. They left him in a ditch, bleeding and broken. When Jacob woke up the next day, he could barely move. Every bone in his body hurt. Sarah came to help him. She brought water and clean cloth. But when Garrett Miller found out, he told the sheriff that Jacob had beaten him instead. He lied and said Jacob had stolen money from his father. The sheriff believed the Miller family. The sheriff always believed the Miller family. They had money. They had power. The word of a poor ranch hand meant nothing. Jacob was arrested. He was going to be hanged for a crime he did not commit. But the night before the hanging, Sarah's father helped him escape. They rode north in the darkness, toward the mountains, toward the empty lands where there was no law and no justice and no Miller family. Jacob had written Sarah a letter. He told her he would come back when he had enough money to fight the Millers. He told her to wait for him. He told her he loved her more than his own life. But Sarah never got the letter. The sheriff took it and burned it. For 5 years, Sarah believed Jacob was dead. For 5 years, she thought he had abandoned her. For 5 years, she lived in a town where she could not escape the Miller family's reach. Now, Jacob was back, and he was not the same boy who had left town. This man was hard. This man was dangerous. This man had learned how to fight. He had worked in cattle drives and mining camps and logging camps. He had learned how to use guns. He had learned how to survive in a world that wanted to kill him. But he had never forgotten Sarah. Every night, under every star, he thought about her face. Every morning when he woke up, he thought about her voice. He had saved money. He had worked and suffered and bled so he could come back and protect her. He had arrived in redemption just in time to see Sarah standing in the rope, just in time to see her about to die for a crime she did not commit. The bullets from Jacob's rifle tore through the rope and the wooden post. The town erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran. Horses bolted in fear. Dust rose up in thick clouds that made it hard to see. Jacob jumped down from a stallion and ran towards Sarah. She was on the ground, still tied, still confused about what was happening. The rope hung loose around her neck like a dead snake. Sarah. Jacob's voice cracked like he had not spoken in years. Maybe he had not. Maybe for 5 years, the only thing he had done was think about her name. Sarah looked up. Her eyes grew wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. "It is me," Jacob said, kneeling down beside her. His hand shook as he untied her wrists. The rope was tight, and it cut in her skin, making it bleed. "It is me. I came back. I promised I would come back." "Jacob." Sarah's voice was small and confused. "Jacob, you are alive?" "I am alive," he said, "and I'm going to get you out of here." Sheriff Blackwood was trying to understand what was happening. His mind was slow, and his reactions were slow. By the time he reached for his gun, Jacob was already pulling Sarah to her feet. He was already moving toward his stallion. "Stop," the sheriff shouted. "You are under arrest for breaking the law." "The only law in this town is the Miller family," Jacob shouted back, "and I do not answer to them anymore." He pulled Sarah toward his horse. But Garrett Miller Sr. stepped out from the crowd, his face twisted with rage. He had a rifle in his hands. "You think you can come back here and take what is mine?" Garrett Miller said. His voice was like poison. "You think you can steal from me?" "She was never yours," Jacob said. "She was always mine, and she always will be." Garrett Miller raised his rifle. His finger moved toward the trigger. But Sarah did something that nobody expected. She picked up a rock from the ground and threw it with all her strength. It hit Garrett Miller in the face. His nose exploded in blood. He fell backward, surprised and hurt and angry. That gave Jacob the moment he needed. He lifted Sarah onto his stallion. He jumped up behind her, and they rode out of Redemption at full speed, disappearing into the dust and the desert. The town was left standing in the middle of Main Street, confused and angry and ashamed. Everything had just changed. Again, dust filled the air like a brown cloud. Gunshots echoed down Main Street and bounced off the wooden buildings. People screamed and ran in all directions. Some hid behind the water trough. Some ran into the saloon. Some threw themselves into the dirt. The world had become chaos in just a few seconds. Sheriff Blackwood drew his gun. His face turned even redder than before. His hands shook with anger. He had never been stopped before. Nobody had ever dared to stop him. "Who in the devil are you?" he shouted at the man on the horse. Jacob Reed pulled hard on his horse's reins and brought the animal to a stop right in the middle of Main Street. Dust swirled around the horse's legs. Jacob's face was calm, too calm. His eyes were dark and cold like winter ice. He looked at the sheriff the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Someone who knows right from wrong," Jacob said. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. Jacob was tall and lean, like a man who had lived hard and seen hard things. His clothes were dusty from long traveling. His hat was worn. His boots were cracked. But his gun was clean and bright and ready. His hands were the hands of someone who had used a gun many, many times. "You have no authority here, stranger," Blackwood said. He kept his gun pointed at Jacob. "You just committed a crime. You shot at an officer of the law." "No," Jacob said. "I shot a rope. The rope had no authority. And neither do you." Sarah sat on the ground where she had fallen, still confused. The rope hung loose around her neck like a dead snake. Her hands were still tied, but she was alive. She was breathing. She was alive. Margaret pushed through the crowd and ran to Sarah. She fell down beside her friend and began untying her hands with shaking fingers. Nobody tried to stop her. Everyone was watching Jacob and the sheriff. "You know who I am?" Jacob asked the sheriff. Blackwood's face went white, like all the blood had drained out of it. "No," Jacob continued, "but I think you will remember Sarah's mother. Her name was Catherine. She lived here 5 years ago." The crowd gasped. Some people put their hands over their mouths. They suddenly understood something they had tried to forget. "You knew my mother?" Sarah asked, her voice small and confused. "I knew her well," Jacob said, still looking at the sheriff. "She was a good woman, a kind woman. She did not deserve what this man did to her." Sheriff Blackwood's hands began to shake. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "That was different, was it?" Jacob asked. "Did you not arrest her for a crime she did not commit? Did you not put her in that jail? Did you not keep her locked away while everyone believed lies about her?" The preacher stepped forward. His face was pale. "We do not speak of that time," he said. "It is in the past. Catherine McKenzie died in that jail," Jacob said, his voice hard as stone. "She died of a broken heart and broken hope. She died because good people did nothing. She died because this man did his job without asking questions." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She suddenly understood. Her mother had died in jail. Her mother had been innocent. Her mother had been destroyed by the same lies, the same injustice, the same silence that was now trying to destroy her. "You let an innocent woman die," Jacob continued, looking at each face in the crowd. "And now you are about to let her daughter die the same way. How many times will you let this happen before you find your courage?" Garrett Miller stepped forward. His face was angry like a storm. "I do not know who you are, but I know you are a fool," Garrett said loudly. "That woman was guilty. These people judged her guilty. The law found her guilty. You cannot change the past, stranger." Jacob turned his dark eyes toward Garrett. "The law," he said slowly, "is only as good as the people who run it. When the people running it are liars and cowards, the law becomes a weapon. And you are both a liar and a coward, Garrett Miller." Garrett's face turned purple with rage. "Draw your gun," he spat at Jacob. "I will not fight you," Jacob said. "I do not fight men who hide behind lies." "Then you are yellow," Garrett said. "You are a coward." "Maybe," Jacob said. "Or maybe I'm just a man who does not want blood in the street when words can do the job." Sheriff Blackwood lowered his gun slowly. He looked at Jacob with fear in his eyes. He looked at Garrett with anger. He looked at the crowd with shame. And then he did something nobody expected. He walked away. He simply walked away from his job and his authority and his power. He went into the saloon and did not come back out. The crowd began to whisper to each other. Slowly, they started talking. They started telling the truth about what they knew. The baker's wife spoke about the gold. The schoolteacher spoke about the lies. The storekeeper spoke about how the Miller boy had bragged about his plan. More and more people found their voices. Fear was leaving them, and truth was taking its place. Garrett Miller's face became a mask of rage and panic. "You are all liars," he screamed. "I will destroy you all. I will burn this town to the ground." He reached for his gun, but Jacob was already moving. He did not shoot. Instead, he dismounted his horse and walked toward Garrett with his hands open and empty. When he reached Garrett, he simply took the gun from the man's hand. Garrett did not even try to fight. He fell to his knees in the dust, broken and defeated. Jacob helped Sarah to her feet. She looked into his face and saw kindness there. She saw someone who had carried pain for a long time, but had chosen to use that pain for something good. "Your mother was a wonderful woman," Jacob said to her. She would be proud of you. You showed more courage facing death than this whole town showed facing the truth. Sarah did not speak. She simply held onto Jacob's hand like it was the only real thing in the world. "What will you do now?" she asked finally. Jacob looked at the town. He looked at the people who were finding their voices again. He looked at the lies being replaced with truth. "Now," he said, "we make sure this never happens again." The sun was setting orange and red over redemption. The town that had almost murdered an innocent woman was now sitting in stunned silence. People moved through the streets like ghosts, not quite awake, not quite believing what had happened. Sarah sat on the wooden bench outside the general store. Margaret sat beside her, holding her hand tight. They did not speak much. Words seemed too small for what they both felt. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a kind of anger that had no place to go. The anger of injustice, the anger of loss. Jacob came and sat on the bench across from him. He carried a cup of hot coffee in each hand. He gave one to Sarah and one to Margaret. His movements were slow and careful, like a man who had learned long ago that sudden movements could scare people. "How are you feeling?" he asked Sarah. "Like I'm still dreaming," Sarah said. Her voice was very quiet. "Like I will wake up and the rope will still be around my neck." "The rope is gone," Jacob said. "You are safe now." "But my mother is still dead," Sarah said. Tears began to run down her face again. She died alone. She died thinking she was a criminal. She died thinking nobody loved her. Jacob looked away for a moment. When he looked back, his eyes were wet too. "Your mother was the strongest woman I have ever known," he said. "Even in that jail, even in the darkness, she never believed the lies. She knew she was innocent, and she knew that you would live, that you would grow up, that you would be better than this town deserved." "How do you know so much about my mother?" Sarah asked. Jacob took a long time before answering. He drank his coffee slowly. He looked at the sunset. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother and I were engaged to be married," he said. "We were going to leave this town. We were going to build a life somewhere else, somewhere better. We had a plan. We had dreams." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Why did you not marry her?" "Because the Miller family wanted to stop her," Jacob said. "Garrett Miller wanted your mother for himself. When she refused him, he became angry. He told lies about her. He said she had stolen money from his family. Sheriff Blackwood believed him. Or maybe Blackwood did not care about the truth. Either way, your mother was arrested. She was locked away. And He stopped. His hands squeezed the coffee cup so hard that Sarah thought it might break. "I was a coward," he continued. "I was afraid. I thought about breaking her out of that jail. I thought about taking her away in the night. But I was afraid of the law. I was afraid of being hunted. So I left. I told myself that I would come back with help. I told myself that I would find a way to save her. But by the time I came back, she was already gone." Sarah stood up. She walked to Jacob and put her arms around him. She hugged him like he was broken. And in that moment, they both cried for Catherine, for lost time, for the injustice that no tears could repair. After a while, Jacob stood up. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Come with me," he said to Sarah. "There is something you need to see." He led her down Main Street to the jail. It was an old stone building with small dark windows. Sheriff Blackwood was not there anymore. He had left town without saying goodbye. The jail was empty and silent. Inside, Jacob took her to a cell in the back. On the stone wall, someone had carved words. Sarah's candlelight moved across the stone and revealed the message. Catherine McKenzie was innocent. Catherine McKenzie was loved. Catherine McKenzie will be remembered. "I carved it the day after she died," Jacob said. "I carved it so that someone would know, so that her name would not be forgotten, so that the truth would exist somewhere, even if nobody else cared." Sarah touched the words with her fingers. She felt the grooves where Jacob had cut into the stone, month after month, creating this message. She felt the love in every letter. Outside the jail, a crowd had gathered. All the people who had stayed silent during the hanging had come to listen. The baker and her wife, the school teacher, the storekeeper, the blacksmith, even some of the farmers from the outlying areas. "We want to tell you something," the baker's wife said. She stepped forward, her hands shaking. "We knew the truth about your mother. We knew she was innocent, and we did nothing. That is a shame we will carry forever. One by one, people came forward. They told their stories. They told about the times they had heard the Miller boy bragging. They told about the gold that had appeared in Sarah's room. They told about the fear that had kept them silent. They apologized, not because it could change anything, but because the words needed to be spoken. The preacher came forward too. His face was marked with deep lines of guilt. I failed in my duty to God, he said. I was supposed to speak for the weak and protect the innocent. Instead, I did nothing. I let fear guide me instead of faith. If there is any redemption for a man like me, it must come from the work of making sure this never happens again. Jacob nodded at the preacher. There is redemption, he said, but only if you earn it by your actions, not by your words. Over the next 3 days, things began to change. A group of people from the town went to Garrett Miller's house and took back the gold. They gave it to Sarah. More importantly, they forced Garrett to leave the territory. He was told that if he ever came back, he would be hanged, not for a crime he did not commit, but for all the crimes he had actually done. Sheriff Blackwood did not return. A new sheriff was elected, a fair man named Thomas Webb who promised to question lies instead of accepting them. On the 4th day, Jacob prepared to leave. He had done what he came to do. He had made sure that Catherine's death was not forgotten. He had made sure that her daughter was safe. Now it was time to move on. Sarah walked with him to his horse. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Sometimes," Jacob said, "to make sure this town keeps its promise, to make sure the truth stays alive." "I will help you," Sarah said. "I will be the voice in this town that speaks for people like my mother. I will be what you could not be. I will be brave." Jacob smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. He touched her shoulder gently. "Your mother would be so proud," he said. And as he rode out of redemption, Sarah stood in the middle of Main Street, watching him go. The sun was rising over the mountains. A new day was beginning, and Sarah McKenzie, who had nearly died for a crime she did not commit, was ready to build a new life, one where truth mattered more than fear. The school building in Redemption was new. The walls were painted white. The windows were clean and bright. Inside, Sarah McKenzie stood in front of 20 children, teaching them to read. Some of the children were from town families. Some were from the ranches outside of town. One was the young daughter of the blacksmith. Another was the baker's grandson. Sarah wrote a word on the board in big letters: justice. "This word means something," she said to the children. "It means that doing what is right is more important than being afraid. It means that protecting weak people is more important than protecting powerful people. It means that telling the truth matters, even when telling the truth is hard." She looked at the faces of the children. They were listening, really listening. These children would grow up different from their parents. They would grow up knowing that silence could be a choice that leads to death. They would grow up understanding that courage matters. The bell rang. The children left the school and ran outside to play. Sarah stayed behind, cleaning the boards and organizing her papers. This was her life now, not grand or exciting, not filled with danger or adventure, but real, honest, good. The door opened, and Margaret came in. Margaret was now the owner of the general store. She had bought it from the old owner who had decided to leave town. She was successful. She was happy. And most importantly, she was respected because she had been one of the first people to tell the truth about the lies the Miller family had spread. "How was school?" Margaret asked. "Good," Sarah said. "The children are learning. And they're learning something more important than reading and writing. They're learning that their voices matter." "Like you learned," Margaret said, smiling. "Like my mother never got to learn," Sarah said quietly. On the wall of the schoolhouse, there was a portrait. Sarah had painted it herself. It was a painting of Catherine McKenzie, Sarah's mother. The painting showed Catherine's face filled with kindness and strength. Beneath the portrait was a plaque made of wood. On the plaque were carved words: "In memory of Catherine McKenzie, an innocent woman whose death changed a town. May we never again choose silence over truth." Every day, children walked past this portrait. Every day, they saw their teacher's mother looking at them with kind eyes. Every day, they understood that injustice was not just a word in a book. It was something that had happened to real people, to people they knew, to people they loved. Sarah and Margaret walked through town together. The changes were visible everywhere. The jail had been turned into a library. Books lined the shelves where prisoners had once sat in darkness. The old saloon was now a community building where people gathered to discuss important matters. They passed by the church. The preacher, Thomas, was outside working on the roof. He was repairing the building with his own hands. He had decided to do physical work every day as a way of earning back the respect he had lost. He worked without complaining. He worked without asking for thanks. He simply worked because it was the right thing to do. "He has changed," Margaret said, watching the preacher. "Fear makes people do bad things," Sarah said. "But shame, when it is real shame, can make them do good things. I think he is trying to be the person he should have been all along." As the sun began to set, Sarah walked alone to the cemetery. She carried flowers, wild flowers from the mountains. She walked to a grave marked with a simple stone. The name on the stone read, Catherine McKenzie, beloved woman. Sarah placed the flowers on the grave. She knelt down in the dirt. "Hello, Mother," she said softly. "I came to tell you about today. The children learned about justice. I told them about you. I told them that you were innocent. I told them that you were brave. I told them that they should never let fear stop them from telling the truth." The wind blew through the cemetery, moving through the grass and the trees. Sarah felt like her mother was listening. She felt like Catherine's spirit was present, watching over the town that had killed her. "A year has passed since I almost died the way you died," Sarah continued. "This town has changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but has changed. People speak up now. They ask questions. They do not accept lies as easily. That is because of you. That is because of your death. You did not die for nothing. Your death meant something." Sarah heard a horse approaching. She turned and saw Jacob Reed riding into the cemetery. He had kept his promise. He came back sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. When he did come back, he always visited Catherine's grave with Sarah. Jacob dismounted and walked to stand beside Sarah. He held his hat in his hands. "Hello, Catherine," he said quietly to the grave. "I'm still trying to be the man you deserved. I am still carrying the shame of leaving you alone. But I am using that shame to help other people. I am making sure that other women do not suffer the way you suffered." Jacob had become known throughout the territory as a man who fought injustice. He traveled from town to town. He investigated cases where innocent people had been arrested. He challenged sheriffs who were lazy or corrupt. He was becoming a legend. The legend of a man who would not stop fighting for what was right. The sun dipped lower on the horizon. The sky turned colors, orange and red and purple. Jacob and Sarah stood together in silence, honoring Catherine's memory. "Thank you for coming back," Sarah said finally. "I will always come back," Jacob said. "As long as I live, I will come back to this place. To remember, to make sure this town does not forget." They walked back toward town together as night fell. The stars began to appear in the sky, bright and clear and eternal. The town of redemption had earned its name. It had redeemed itself. Not perfectly, not completely, but it had chosen truth over lies. It had chosen courage over fear. Sarah McKenzie would spend her life teaching children in redemption. She would spend her life telling the story of her mother. She would spend her life making sure that the injustice that had killed Catherine never happened again in her town. And Jacob Reed would spend his life traveling, fighting, and returning, always returning, to a cemetery where a good woman was buried. A woman whose death had changed everything. Years later, when Sarah became old and had students of her own, she would tell them this story. The story of her mother. The story of injustice. The story of how silence can be a crime and how courage can change a town. And those children would grow up knowing that one person's bravery and one community's willingness to finally tell the truth could heal even the deepest wounds. In the end, justice had not come from the law. It had come from people choosing to speak. It had come from people choosing to care. It had come from people choosing to be brave. And that was the most powerful justice of all. The end.